Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think if everyone could sort of start coming in, there's still a number of seats available for this session this morning. So I would just kindly ask everyone still standing to sort of start taking their seats so that we can commence the session on Desert to Power right on time. We'll give it 2-3 more minutes and then we'll kick off. And the Minister of Niger.
I'm going to say.
C'est le ministre de Norvège.
And who's the guy who's sitting at the end? Because I recognize the guy who's sitting at the end.
That's Energy Alliance for Planet and Prosperity.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out why I recognize his name or face.
Henry, good seeing you. How are you?
Am I on time?
Yeah,
Great.
perfect. We're starting any minute. All right, I think
Where do you want to sit him?
the President will be sitting here,
okay,
next to the two
by the
ministers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Kevin, are you sitting just behind the President?
Okay, no problem.
Minister of Norway, well, you know Henry, of course.
Kevin, see you. Pleasure sharing it. I know. Good to see you, Kevin. Hey, how are you, Henry, with the Green Climate Fund?
Very fantastic.
Right. Mr. President, just here in between the ministers.
He's going to grace us. Huh? Didn't know that he's going to grace us with his presence.
Yes, of course. Of course. Sorry.
Can help us there?
Hello, how are you? Good to see you.
We'll have it ready in
Yes, okay.
July when I have to go in Sudan.
All right, Kevin, I'm sure it's aware.
You're only missing Mark and the Minister for Niger.
Yeah.
Let me say good morning. How are you? My friends, how are you?
Hey, Daniel. How are you? Waiting for you.
Excuse me. We are interpreters. Can we have your talking points?
Oh,
A picture of them at least.
well, I'm not sure you can read my talking.
It's better than because nobody did it nothing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask everyone to take a seat. We will start imminently the session on Desert to Power. And there's still a few seats I see in the back available. So if anyone is looking for a seat, please take these now. Right. Well, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this event here at the Africa Pavilion at COP27 on Desert to Power, transforming the Sahel from fragility to resilience and prosperity. It is a great pleasure to see so many friends, familiar faces here. It's also great, again, to be able to meet persons in real life and not have just virtual conversations and Zoom meetings. Just to say, my name is Daniel Schroth. I'm the Director for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency at the African Development Bank, and I have the pleasure to facilitate today's event on Desert to Power. Let me just indicate that we have translation available, interpretation available from English to French and French to English. So if you need interpretation, please give a sign and you will get the required technical equipment. When we talk about and when we read about the Sahel, what are the messages that we're seeing being reported? These are messages of fragility, messages of natural disasters, messages of instability and high risk. Yet at the same time, the Sahel disposes of some of the best solar potential in the world. A solar potential that to date is largely unharnessed. And I just want to give you one figure which for me really illustrates that quite aptly, which is over the 11 countries of the Desert to Power initiative, from Senegal in the west all the way to Eritrea and Djibouti in the east, the total solar generation capacity to date is, and based on IRENA statistics, is 730 megawatt. And that only represents 0.086% of the total world's solar generation capacity to date. So 0.086% capacity to date of the 11 countries of the Sahel, despite that tremendous potential. And that's precisely what Desert to Power wants to change. So without further ado, it is my real pleasure to welcome a man who really needs no introduction, the president of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, for his opening remarks. Please give him a warm welcome. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Morning? Still morning, yes. I thought we transitioned to afternoon. Well, first, let me welcome His Excellency President Bazoum. I understand he is going to be addressing us by video. Let me also welcome at the same time Mr. Bakuri, who is the chair of the steering committee for the Desert to Power, who also, I think, is going to be addressing us by video. Welcome, my dear sister, Minister Anbeth from Norway, to the Verein. Thank you very much for your great support, great partners from the Green Climate Fund, ministers that are here from Niger, Mauritania. Bon, je dois dire ça en français, donc c'est le bienvenu, Monsieur le ministre du Niger, de Mauritanie et tous les pays qui seront concernés par le Desert to Power, friends of Africa, ladies and gentlemen. First, and thank you very much, Daniel, for all the work that you're doing. This is a very, very important day for us. An important day to be able to also present to you what this great initiative is about. You know, I remember when I went to visit one of the countries in the Sahel, I met with the head of state, and he said to me, actually it was at that time the late president of Chad, and he has sent his minister to meet me at the airport. And when we were at the airport, the temperature was about 39 degrees, and I left the minister on the tarmac, and I rushed into my car, and we went. And when we got to the palace, he said, President said, well, why? My minister said, you let me let him at the tarmac. I said, yes, because I didn't want to have a cardiac arrest. It was so hot. And on my way, I had met with the ambassadors in Chad, and I asked them, what is the electricity access rate in Chad? They told me the electricity access rate in Chad was 8%. So here was I went to the president, very excited to say, we've got to change that. I got that and I told the president, Mr. President, c'est pas acceptable. We have to change that. They told me that the electricity access rate here is 8%. He told me, he said, who did you talk to? They are lying. Who's been lying to you? So I thought maybe I had 28% or 38% or 48% and I didn't understand. Oh, he said, because it is not 8%, it is 2%. So that tells you how the electricity access rate is so low all across the Sahel. What do you see? You find terrorists, you find migration, you find degradation, you have extreme poverty, and guess what? Terrorists always operate where there is no electricity. And so there's a direct linkage between having electricity and having security. And therefore, when you take a look at the Sahel, I told the president, I said, my 3 days in Chad, all you need to do is to put some cables on my skin and connect me to the grid, and you will have power. That is how much it is, the radiation you have. In the Sahel today, they have about 2,400 to 3,600, megawatt hours per year. That is the highest you will find in the world. So why is it that they don't have electricity? So this is what the desert to power is all about. It's taking the power of the sun and turning it into electricity to power all the economies of the Sahel. The initiative covers 11 countries. The G5 Sahel countries, Niger, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and all the way to northern Nigeria, to Djibouti, to Ethiopia, and all of that are very, very major countries that we have over there. The initiative is a $20 billion initiative to do 10,000 megawatts of solar and to provide electricity for 250 million people. And this will be the largest solar zone in the world. And so we want to turn this into a real economic activity, productive energy for use. For the countries of the Sahel that are here, the G5 Sahel, that is about roughly 3,000 megawatts that we want to do. And that will provide electricity for roughly $3 billion for 6 million people to have access to electricity in the Sahel. Let me say that this initiative has several components. One component is to get the grid power. The other one is to get decentralized energy power. The third one is to have the utilities working very well. And then the other one is to have regional transmission so that we can get power into different parts of the West Africa power pool. And the last one, which is very unique to this initiative, is the policy and the regulatory environment to make sure if you are investing in an environment in which there's great political support, coordination around the policy environment, the pricing of energy, and the strong utilities and transmission. So this is very, very important. Let me thank the ministers from the various countries for your great support. The heads of state of all the countries endorsed this in 2019, in July. And then there was a special heads of state meeting just on the Desert for Power Initiative in 2021, at which, again, the heads of state said, this is the thing to do. And so I want to really thank them very much for that. One more thing I want to say about Desert to Power, how it contributes to climate change reduction, is the desert, is the Great Green Wall. We have the Great Green Wall, which is 8,000 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide, so that we can create a defense shield against the climate for the Sahel because of desertification. Well, guess what? If there is no energy, what do you think is going to happen? That is just a pile of charcoal. They are going to cut down every single thing. So it's not good for the environment. So the Great Green Wall and the Desert to Power, the Desert to Power will protect the Great Green Wall against being cut down, and therefore it's good to protect desertification and also to protect against the issue of biodiversity loss. I would like to thank the technical support being provided by Mr. Bakuri, the MASEN. Most of you may not know MASEN. It's the Moroccan agency for renewable energy. They build the world's largest concentrated solar power plant in the world that we were very happy to have supported. So we asked them to support us as we collectively do these main efforts. You may ask the question, what's been done to date? This is being implemented as we speak. Projects in Chad, for example, which is a 34 megawatts project, is the first IPP on solar that will be in Chad. It will provide 10% of all the energy for Chad, and also it's going to be construction is going to start, I think, maybe this year already, because all the approvals have been given. The other one is in Burkina Faso. It's called Project Yellen. Yellen project, it is on-grid and off-grid Yellen, rural area grid for Yellen, but also we are already approving projects as well for Niger, for 40 megawatts for Niger, and 30 megawatts also for Eritrea as well in the East Africa side of it. Ladies and gentlemen, without a power pool, it doesn't matter what you generate. So that's why the bank is really heavily investing in the Sahel backbone to transmit energy. Let me close by thanking our partners that have helped us to mobilize resources. First, let me thank you very much for the Green Climate Fund for the $150 million that you supported, because that's a big one for us as we continue to do this, and we look forward to working a lot with you. So say hi to Glamerek, my brother, really for me on that. I'd like to thank also Sweden for providing us 170 million kroners, which is 20 million. So thank you very much, Sweden, for your great support for that. Let me thank also Agence Française de Développement that's putting in 100 million euros into that work. The Rockefeller Foundation is putting in $100 million into this, so let's thank them for that. And the Climate Investment Fund for $70 million. At the African Development Bank, our board approved for us in December a $1 billion G5 Sahel facility that will then include the financing from the Green Climate Fund to be able to get this all going. But let me end my thanks by also thanking Norway and also thanking Sweden again, because without Norway and without Sweden, we will not have the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. It's a $300 million contribution from both of you that have now made SEFA the world's largest facility for supporting renewable energy. So thank you very much for that. We are approaching others, and I know there are many people here. The Abu Dhabi Fund, I don't know if they're here. Well, we'd really like to talk to you a lot. We are also, where are they? Huh? Power Africa, yes, I was going to say US Power Africa. Yeah, I see please, US Power Africa is a great partner of ours. We're talking to the UK government, the British Private Infrastructure Development Group. I think they said they might consider, I'm not going to tell you the number, but they might consider some big number in terms of this. Also to say that we are all together. I just want you to look at the person next to you. Please. Yes. Just look. Regardez, ça va, ça va. On est dans un environnement, il n'y a pas le COVID maintenant. Yes. And I'm saying that because we will not be here without your partnership. We will not be here because of your interest. We will not be here because of unless you have the commitment. And we need you to be able to continue to execute and deliver on this project. In an African village, we have what they call a baobab tree. How many of you see a baobab tree? Yeah, you go around Africa, a baobab tree, very big tree. Well, you try and put your hand around it, you can't. But if you actually stretch your hands with so many and you go around the tree, then everybody is able to be around it. The desert of power is Africa's baobab tree for energy, and we need many hands around it to make it happen. So please join me, reach hands to the people next to you. Please just reach out your hand. Yes, a baobab hand. Yeah, just do that. And say, let's do it. Okay, good, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for these inspiring remarks, and indeed, Desert to Power as the baobab tree for energy in Africa. It is now my distinct pleasure to invite everyone to listen to the remarks recorded by video from the chairman of the Desert to Power Steering Committee and also the CEO and chairman of Mazen in Morocco, Mustafa Bakouri. So if we can just play, please, the first video message. Thank you. If we also can have the sound, please. Yeah, these are the challenges, obviously, with having these partly virtual arrangements. But I hope we have the sound any second. The technical team could just try to sort it out. Ah, I hear.
Cette détermination peut s'appuyer sur la haute implication d'excellentes missions d'échange, ainsi que la mobilisation précieuse des ministres de l'énergie, ainsi que ceux des autres secteurs concernés. Depuis la COP tenue à Marrakech, la COP27 revient à nouveau dans un grand défi, l'Égypte, en misant cette fois-ci sur l'accélération de la rémunération de base, que ce soit en termes d'adaptation ou de détermination. Force est de constater que malgré les obstacles auxquels nous avons dû faire face au cours des 3 dernières années, notamment la pandémie qui a imposé un déguisement profond des priorités, ainsi que les crises énergétiques dues à l'insignification des conflits internationaux, notre initiative a fait preuve d'une grande résilience et a enregistré de grandes avancées dans le déploiement effectif au niveau de chacun des pays du G5 Sahel. Nous pouvons citer en exemple le travail réalisé au niveau de la préparation de projets prioritaires, aussi bien pour la production d'électricité que pour la renforcement des réseaux électriques. Et à ce stade, je voudrais mentionner de manière forte le rôle déterminant du Burkina Faso pour la conception des préliminaires, ainsi que l'apport précieux des équipes qui contribuent grandement au déploiement de l'initiative. Je voudrais également mentionner et remercier chaleureusement les partenaires qui nous accompagnent. J'espère qu'ils seront rejoints par d'autres, tout autant attachés au développement de la flotte. Dans cette continuité, l'année 2023 devra représenter une
Right. A big round of applause for Mr. Bakary, who unfortunately could not be with us today. Okay, all right. I'll try to be as close as possible so that everyone can hear me. Right. It is now my pleasure to also invite the video of His Excellency, the President of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum, who has also wanted to be part of this event, but could not be here anymore today, but he has kindly recorded a video message for us. So if we could... can we have the second video, please? Okay, fantastic, thank you. Okay, we seem to be having persistent technical issues, and I'm enormously sorry to be having to interrupt the message from the President of Niger. We will listen to the message a bit later in the program. I would like now to invite I would like to invite now the speakers for the first session of this event. Would particularly like to welcome His Excellency Abdesalam Mohamed Saleh, the Minister of Petroleum, Mines and Energy of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Please take a seat. I would also like to invite the Honorable Anbeat Twinereim, I'm not sure I pronounced it correctly, the Minister of International Development of Norway. please take a seat. I would also like to invite to the floor Joseph Nganga, who's the Managing Director of the Global Energy Alliance for Planet and People, GEP. And last but certainly not least, I would like to invite Maria Selim, Head of Regional Development Program at the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA. Thank you very much. I think this demonstrates really the richness of the partnership that we're having on Desert to Power. I would like to invite you now for brief interventions here from the floor, and also looking forward to any announcements that we can hear from your side. I would first of all like to invite the Honorable Minister Mohamed Saleh, Minister of Mauritania, for his intervention. Monsieur le Ministre, la parole est à vous.
Merci beaucoup and thank you very much. Let me first of all convey the warm greetings of His Excellency President of Mauritania, Mohamed Sheikh Ghazouani. He would love to be with you, President, but he had to leave on the 8th. So apologies and of course to all of you to invite you. I would like to congratulate you for your extraordinary leadership in pushing ahead with this very, very innovative initiative. We are out, thanks to you and others, of what we can call the energy myopia. For many years, energy was simply not on the development agenda. Look at the agenda of the 2003, the global ODD, development objectives. Not one single objective, not one single target related to energy. And it was about poverty. So how can you defeat poverty without not one single target on energy? How can you defeat poverty? How can you generate opportunities, generate activities, address, you mentioned it, water. Water works with energy. There is nothing on earth that doesn't work with energy. But somehow we missed that. Why do we miss that? That is a question for the people working on economic development, maybe the reviewing of the study to help us understand how this myopia has developed. But now, fortunately, we are out of this myopia, and we recognize everything has to go through energy. Now we face a challenge because the energy we know is the one that use fossil fuels. And we know that doesn't work anymore for our planet, and maybe doesn't work for us as well. And for us as a Sahel, one of the victims of the climate change, it definitely doesn't work. So we need to find other approaches, and we are the pioneers actually in developing this new trajectory which generates economic growth, employment without generating huge greenhouse gas emission. So thank you for that, but I can tell you we'll get there. Mauritania has developed now its comprehensive energy strategy using our gas resources, our renewable resources. The northern part of the country, all the country actually has immense radiation, solar radiation, but the northern part of the country has a particularity to be one of the rare spots on earth where you have wind blowing every day and sun blowing every day, and therefore you can produce renewable energy almost every day and all along the year, and it's perfect for producing green hydrogen. And this is why our strategy now is clearly geared to one very important strategic objective for our energy sector is to make Mauritania a hub of energy, energy transition, energy gas because of our large gas resources, but also a clean energy, green hydrogen, not only for exports, but for transforming our iron ore. And the statistics are incredible, you know. When you look at what the prospects, they are simply incredible. If we go that way and we deliver now the project that we have signed, the last one of them was with BP at the start of this conference, we will generate an economic growth double digit. And we'll halve by two the number of unemployed. Will more importantly generate industrialization, because the problem of Africa is industrialization. The employment problem is industrialization, and we can't get there with the electricity we have because it's too expensive, it's intermittent, it's not reliable. With your initiative and others, we can get there. And very quickly then, I just want to say that we would like to congratulate your team. They have done a fantastic job in drafting the regional roadmap. They have drafted the national one and we count on your support. You mentioned it. We'll not be able to do anything if we don't have this reliable transport lines that connect all of Africa. Let's also make Africa, our countries, benefit from our gas, benefit maybe from our renewable resources. Our intention is really to have the cheapest electricity on earth in Africa and change the narrative about our economic development, while at the same time addressing the planet issue. We can do that if our continent can do that, can contribute to the well-being of the rest of the world and industrialize itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, for this really inspirational words about the situation in Mauritania, what you're doing, your vision for the country, and the importance of desert to power. It's now my distinct pleasure to invite the Honourable Minister of Norway, a big partner of the African Development Bank, for her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Whoops. There. Can you hear me okay? Even at the back? Fantastic. It's very rewarding to work on the SDG 7, renewable energy to all, because we know what to do. We have the technology. We have that baobab tree even. We just need to nurture it and make it grow bigger and higher and greater. But you know, we are delivering on this SDG 7. And we know that it's critical because sustainable energy creates so many wheels of development. And you are quite right, Honourable Minister. It's quite absurd that we haven't been able to put energy on renewable energy on the agenda much earlier, because it really is key to developing Africa. And we know that the magnitude in sub-Saharan Africa, and especially in the Sahel region, is enormous. 600 million people lack access to energy. We need to make sure that that access is to renewable energy and not old fossil solutions. We also know that 900 million people lack access to clean cooking technology. But we have the solutions out there. So let's nurture our baobab. To tackle the multiple crises in the Sahel region, we need many things, but especially two. We need the readiness of the governments of the region, and we need sustained support from the international community. And the Desert to Power initiative, developed by the African Development Bank, responds to both of those. And I'm so pleased to note the very strong, high-level engagement and support from the Sahel countries, as well as the mobilization of project preparation and concessional finance resources from many international partners. For example, from the Green Climate Fund, $150 million and many other mentioned by Adesina. And the key instrument now for the African Development Bank to support the achievement of SDG 7 is the SEFA. So Norway has supported SEFA since 2019. We are committed to strengthening that partnership. It's more needed than ever before. According to the World Energy Outlook that was published just a few weeks ago, we see that after a steady increase in access to energy in sub-Saharan Africa, the number of people without access to energy is now declining. It's declining. So we have to turn that tide, people, and I'm very pleased to announce that Norway will step up. We will increase our support to SEFA with 300 million Norwegian crowns. Very pleased that SEFA, thank you. Thank you. I'm very pleased that SEFA is a channel to support the Desert to Power initiative, which is being showcased here today. And let me just finally highlight how SEFA is emphasizing the nexus between energy access and food security through water, through agriculture. I truly believe that the primary sector, food production in Africa, is a motor of development, but the agricultural sector needs renewable energy, and this is a priority area for Norway. And I'm so much looking forward to our continued cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, if I can ask you to basically just immediately turn this announcement into a formal commitment with the instrument of commitment signing here right on the spot, and you can hand it over.
Great. No, why wait?
Exactly, and we can take a picture with the President. Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. That was an exciting announcement and very concrete, immediately actualized. It's now my pleasure to invite our good friends from the Global Energy Alliance for Planet and Prosperity, Joseph Nganga, for his remarks. And yes, Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Let's see if this will work. Some of us are head challenged in the wrong direction. My name is Joseph Nganga, as you heard, and I lead the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet's work in Africa. The Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet has been set up by 3 philanthropies, including Rockefeller, Bezos, and IKEA Earth Fund, to drive 3 outcomes: electrification, energy access, of course, through electrification, to drive CO2 reduction through renewable energy, and of course to drive economic development by creating jobs with that energy. It is therefore absolutely fit to be here today to support the Desert to Power, because Desert to Power is seeking to achieve those 3 outcomes. Mr. President, both my CEO, Simon Harford, and Dr. Raj Shah from the Rockefeller Foundation would have loved to be here, but they've left already, but they send their regards and express their full support to the Desert to Power program. So from our perspective, we believe that we should be an alliance-led initiative. On the Desert to Power program, led by Africa Development Bank, we are very delighted that they've asked us to support them. We strongly believe that they have the infrastructure, the capability, the resources, and clearly the government relationships to make this baobab hugging process work quite efficiently. So we're delighted that you asked us to support you, and we're here to do that. As the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, we have 3 ways that we think about how we can support this work. The first one, of course, is to drive policy and regulation, and we are therefore very happy to support the Desert to Power program through TA to support governments to be able to deliver on this. The second bit is we believe that private sector and innovation is critical to driving electrification. We are therefore very happy to also be able to be supporting towards innovative solutions, creative solutions that will drive the Desert to Power to success. Some of the things we're considering include bulk procurement, where we can support large-scale purchase of equipment which lowers cost and therefore makes power in these areas a lot more affordable. The other area is we know for sure that as we bring electrons, those electrons must be used for productive use to drive economic development. We are therefore very happy to be partnering to drive innovation on things like how can we use that energy to drive green hydrogen, to drive productive use. And the third bit for us, of course, is de-risking private sector. This will only succeed if there is tremendous uptake of private sector investment into infrastructure in the Sahel region. We would like to partner on de-risking some of those investments to ensure large-scale, rapid adoption of renewable energy. It is therefore my pleasure, Mr. President, to indicate that at the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, we are committing $35 million through SEFA to support your initiatives, which we're very proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for this announcement of $35 million to the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa to also support Desert to Power. GIAP has already signed the instrument, but we can take a picture together. You can also sign it, of course, Mr. President. Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to invite Maria Salim from our good friends of Sweden, and we heard the President already refer to the commitment that the Minister made last year, but we're also working closely with the Swedish International Development Agency. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. And Your Excellencies, thank you also for recognizing the support from Sweden. And I think it's wonderful to be sitting next to the Minister of Norway, showing also a strong Nordic commitment to the Sahel. And of course we're here because we do recognize the extremely challenging situation, and we've heard about it, we know it. The planet is facing multiple crises, and this event and all the other events here show the commitment and the dedication to do something about it. Investments in development is crucial, and I represent SIDA, and we can create development opportunities, but we also recognize that there is a need to leverage other financial flows. And there are a lot of discussions around this, the need to bring on board also the private sector to finance the SDG agenda. And I know this is a very, very strong target for the work that you're doing here. And I am truly, truly honored to be representing Sweden in this event, where we engage in a program that, like Desert to Power, that seeks to deliver the progress on the ground. Despite all the challenges, we need to seek more renewable solutions, energy projects like this one. And we know also that it is what it takes to support the people on the ground that are bearing the toughest grunt with climate change. And for us as a development partner, we always want to see the focus set on those who are affected the most by the climate crisis. We want to see also the women and the children put in the center, and I know that this is exactly what this program will deliver. So it was very rightly so specified that Sweden did make a substantial contribution to the program last year, and we do, as Dr. Siba absolutely explained initially, we see the progress, and we see that there are a number of projects also in the pipeline. So we're very pleased to see the progress. I would also like to say that my colleagues in Stockholm are very much involved in looking at other financing opportunities here. We do work with other instruments, such as our guarantee instrument, and that is exactly something that could be applicable applicable here. So I won't take up much more of the time. I know Daniel is struggling with the timetable. So I really want to thank you again for inviting us, and we will follow this program with huge interest, and we look forward to our continued fruitful partnership. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Maria, and indeed I would like to really highlight the close collaboration that we're having with CEDA, currently working on putting together a guarantee facility that will help de-risk private sector investments in the Sahel, and I hope that on the next occasion, certainly next year, we're able to announce the conclusion of that agreement. So I would really like to thank all the persons who intervened, all the commitments and engagement towards Desert to Power. We have already been speaking about the importance of the private sector, as several have referred to it. And I would really like now to invite the second panel. First of all, a big round of applause for the interveners. I would like to ask the Minister of Mauritania to stay with us up here. And really like to thank again everyone for intervening. We also had envisaged to connect virtually the Minister of Djibouti, but I suspect that we would probably have challenges in establishing that connection, and I really apologize to our friends from Djibouti that we sort of move forward now because of technical issues. With that, I would really like to invite the panelists. Yeah. Yeah, if we can just take a picture of the panel, and I would also like to ask all the other panelists for a family picture to come already up on the stage before we engage on the panel discussion. Yes. It's all a bit improvised, but I think we're getting there. And I think this is already almost half the way around the baobab here. Monsieur le Ministre, s'il vous plaît. Carla, please. Gauri, yes. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I would like to ask the panelists for the second session, Monsieur le Ministre. Yeah. Right. I would like to invite now to the floor for a panel discussion specifically focusing on how to increase private sector investments in the Sahel. Honourable Minister of Mauritania is already on the floor. I would also like to welcome the Honourable Minister Ibrahim Yakubu, Minister of State, Minister of Energy and Renewable Energy of the Republic of Niger. We also would like to invite Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency. It's going to be a little bit crowded up here. Apologies for that. To take a seat. I'm very pleased that our good friend Paddy Padmanabhan, the Chief Executive Officer of Aqua Power, is with us today, this morning. Also pleased to see Mark Carato, the Coordinator of Power Africa and a close friend and partner of the African Development Bank for many years. I'm very pleased to welcome Carla Montesi to join the panel. Apologies. The Director, Green Deal Digital Agenda of the European Commission. Also very pleased to welcome Henry Gonzalez, the Deputy Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. And last but certainly not least, our good friend Ali Zerouali, the Director of Cooperation and International Development of Mazen. So this is again a demonstration of the partnership that exists on Desert to Power to have so many people here for panel discussion around how to facilitate more private sector investments. And I would really like to start by inviting the Honourable Minister of Niger to explain a little bit about Niger's plans in terms of developing solar energy in Niger. We're already working together very closely on Desert to Power. But also if you could give a little bit perspective, what role do you envisage the private sector to play in sort of seizing, harnessing that solar potential of Niger? Monsieur le ministre, vous avez la parole.
Merci. I'm sorry, I will speak in French because I'm sure that my English is not so good. Je voudrais d'abord remercier la Banque africaine de développement pour cette excellente initiative et pour cette activité extrêmement importante pour nos pays. Le président de la BAD a tout à l'heure expliqué les enjeux. Pour la plupart des pays qui sont dans l'initiative Desert to Power, l'énergie est un enjeu de survie sociale et de développement économique. Les indicateurs dans nos pays sont extrêmement faibles. Ils sont si faibles que la plupart d'entre nous ici, nous ne les répéterons pas parce que nous sommes très gênés. Et ils sont si faibles qu'ils traduisent une inégalité insupportable à l'intérieur de nos pays, entre les villes et le monde rural, et entre les pays. Et je sais qu'ici, personne ne doute que l'envie de développement est la même pour tous les peuples. Et c'est pourquoi je considère que cette initiative est un des instruments par lesquels nous pouvons et nous allons progresser dans l'accès à l'énergie. Je n'ai pas été mandaté pour cela, mais je voudrais appeler les partenaires à continuer à soutenir la BAD qui a mis en place cet instrument par lequel nous travaillons. S'agissant du Niger, et je pense que c'est la plupart dans les pays africains, nous avons aujourd'hui des défis très importants qui font que ce que l'État doit faire, et avec des moyens limités, il mobilise le secteur privé pour le faire. Donc dans l'accès à l'énergie, les programmes que nous avons entre l'État du Niger et les partenaires comme la BAD, la Banque africaine, la Banque mondiale et certains partenaires bilatéraux vont nous permettre d'accroître la part du renouvelable dans notre mix énergétique. Il est très très faible pour le moment. Mais dans les années à venir, nous sommes en train de faire des centrales à Niamey, au nord à Agadez. Et avec la Banque africaine de développement, nous avons une feuille de route par laquelle nous nous sommes engagés d'ici 2030 à produire un peu moins de 400 MW en solaire. 400 MW, ça correspond exactement à un peu plus même que la capacité que nous avons actuellement. Donc c'est un défi sur nous-mêmes et c'est un défi aussi avec notre partenaire de montrer que nous sommes capables en 10 ans de produire autant de capacités que nous l'avions fait dans les 60 dernières années. Mais pour cela, nous avons mis en place un cadre législatif très important qui permet au privé d'investir, de participer à la croissance économique de notre pays. Le Niger a l'un des indicateurs de croissance économique le plus élevé dans la zone Afrique. Et cette croissance va encore s'amplifier dans les années à venir. Nous avons également une demande qui est portée par une dynamique démographique un peu spéciale ou même exceptionnelle dans notre pays. Donc pour accompagner cela, nous avons ce que nous sommes en train de faire au niveau du gouvernement avec nos ressources. Nous avons ce que nous sommes en train de faire avec les partenaires comme la Banque africaine de développement. Mais nous comptons aussi mobiliser, rassurer, intéresser le secteur privé pour venir investir au Niger et produire l'électricité et améliorer les indicateurs. Donc nous avons une législation pour cela appropriée. Nous avons un cadre approprié, mais nous sommes en train encore de l'améliorer pour que le secteur privé soit rassuré et motivé à investir. Donc nous pensons que la part du secteur privé va prendre l'importance parce que c'est un des outils dont nous disposons pour accroître et atteindre nos objectifs en cette matière. Voilà ce que je voulais dire pour le moment.
Thank you very much, Minister, for really outlining clearly the plans of Niger and highlighting the importance of private sector investments and everything that Niger is already doing to facilitate those investments. Well, I think we've been talking quite a bit about the private sector. I think it's time to hear from someone of the private sector. So I invite really Paddy. Well, Aqua Power is one of the most important investors in solar energy in Africa, and we have the pleasure of working very closely with Aqua Power on a number of projects. But what are maybe the couple of 3-4 things that you think would be most important of the governments of the Sahel to address to see more private sector investments?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure and privilege to be joining you today. And thank you to Daniel and the African Development Bank who have been collaborating with us in order to enable us to be able to deliver what we do in the continent of Africa. Look, a lot has been said, and we are extremely supportive of the Desert to Power initiative, simply because it's addressing all the key pieces of what will enable private sector to deliver. The regulation, dealing with transmission and distribution. Huge amount of effort is now going into generation, and the generation has brought the cost down spectacularly. We now need to move the power to the places to use it efficiently and multiply it. Desert to Power is dealing with all of that. I'm not going to repeat anything. I think, President and all the others have already articulated the details. I'm going to urge the private sector to stop now discussing what we need from governments. Governments are stepping up. They're getting the message. They are starting to. A hell of a lot more work needs to be done in terms of regulation, creating the platform, really creating the vision and commitment. But private sector also now needs to understand that technology has brought us to a place where we can deliver electricity at a stunningly low cost. And what that means is that we should rethink the risk paradigm. The reason why electricity is now still being discussed at 12 cents, 13 cents, 14 cents per kilowatt hour is because we are completely, even as private sector, we are completely mispricing risk. I'm going to take a little bit more time just to set out what I'm saying. When you give electricity to somebody who has not had electricity ever before, and you end up providing that electricity at 12 cents per kilowatt hour, either the person cannot afford it and is going to just forget about it and not use it, or they will at best use it absolutely minuscule, just for the basic essentials and nothing more. But if you are able to deliver electricity at 5 cents, which we now can, provided we price the risk right, that person is going to take that electricity and use it not just for the essentials, but for much more, and to start creating value from that electricity. Ridiculously low level, they're going to start cooking and selling to the neighbor at a profit and make the money go around. So I think we need to understand that the risk associated with pricing that electricity correctly and not market pricing it, thinking, oh, they used to get it at 40 cents, I'm doing them a great favor by now bringing it at 12. Nonsense. Technology allows us to now reduce the cost of electricity to a very low price. So today, all the time, my discussions in all these panel sessions, I think, yes, we need to continue to beat up the governments and say, please, get your regulations, please, give the vision, important. But we, the private sector, also need to completely throw away the risk models of the past. Forget about thinking outside the box. Because when you think outside the box, you still stay firmly around the periphery of the box. Throw the box away. Rethink risk. Completely different place we are in. Simply because, as I say, innovation, technology has brought us to a completely different place. And I think that is what is going to make a difference. Having the multilateral development banks, the bilateral development banks, and having private sector and the public sector partnerships will get us there. But there is no point in running around and saying, give me grant money. I price the risk high, give me grant money, I kind of blend it and bring it low. Nonsense. That's unsustainable. What we need to do is to just reprice the risk properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and really all about risk, and in fact a lot of risk that is more perceived than actual. So really a call to action to the private sector here. I'm very pleased to hear that. Let me bring in Mark just on that private sector angle, because Power Africa, of course, is a coalition as well with a lot of private sector stakeholders. Sort of how can Power Africa mobilize that kind of network of private sector partners to really help translate plans into concrete megawatts on the ground?
No, thank you, Daniel. Thanks, President Adesina, Vice President Kariuki. It's good to see so many friends here. In fact, I think I should mention Henry and I are on our second panel in 3 hours today. So Power Africa truly is a partnership, and that approach for us is so critical. And I think I love what Patty's saying, and I love it that it's coming from the private sector in particular. You know, on some levels, Desert to Power does exactly what Power Africa was set to do. We both want to dramatically increase energy access in countries that need it most, while supporting the transition in a renewable space. And I think we need to do that on the backs and of the private sector, the innovation, the experience, the resources, because we all know the problem is too big. And at some level, the market has failed because there's need here, there's ability to pay here, yet we still haven't gotten to the systems in place, the ecosystem in place to get there. On some level, we'll all be successful when we're not needed, in the sense that the ecosystem itself will generate enough investment, enough enthusiasm, enough excitement to keep people to invest upfront equity, knowing that there's going to be a runway of projects over time, right? And so Desert to Power, to some extent, Power Africa to a full extent, over time, hopefully, we'll continue to find niches to be useful, but hopefully we won't be needed quite the same way we're needed now. So in terms of Desert to Power in particular, we clearly believe in the way forward. We know that the Sahel countries pose unique challenges in building up the right market. It's not the easiest place to get capital to fly to. So we try to find very specific things to make it work. In this example, we've invested in 4 transaction advisors, 4 technical advisors for Desert to Power. One's an investment promotion advisor, looking at standardizing the solar investment approach and matching the lending, right? Standardization is one of those things that's going to allow that cost curve to come down that Patty's talking about. 2, we need to figure out ways to get other revenue sources into the power sector, and to get power sector into the other revenue sources, right? So to some extent, we talked about this earlier, the cross-sectoral approach is one that is so obvious, and I can't believe we haven't gotten there earlier. Agriculture, the second technical advisor is looking at agriculture and how we get productive use of agriculture, how we make sure the power we get is not just power, but productive use. Because it works both ways. It's going to be the ladder out of energy poverty and then poverty in general, but it also brings revenue stream into these models that allows us to bank it. And as we get more and more banking it, everything we do is subsidy, right? Desert to Power, Power Africa, it's a subsidy because right now the market can't quite make the gap. But we can tag that subsidy to the market, and as we get more revenue streams, decrease that over time. So we can have a smart, subsidized, market-based approach, which is what's needed in the places where the systems clearly haven't gotten there by themselves yet. The third is the other side, and we're working with the government of Niger here. We need to make sure that the governments have the ecosystems and the right regulatory to be able to meet the private sector and the rest of us to get there. So with the government of Niger, we're working on their Desert to Power roadmap to make sure that they're ready to be there, both the capacity and the right regulatory environment to move the private sector forward. And then fourth is often what we do, project finance, a transactor embedded with AfDB's secretariat, supporting investment across the geography. So we have to make sure that people who know how to make the deals are also in there as well. So between more revenue, more private sector, smart subsidies linked to market approaches, the right financial folks, we start building this ecosystem that of course is needed over time. I'd be remiss too though if I didn't give 2 more quick examples. One of which is Power Africa is more than just the programs we fund behind. We're also one of the largest, if not the largest, public-private partnership for development in the world. And part of that is the 12 US government agencies. In this case, the Development Finance Corporation is a big part of what we do. So we also want to make sure that when we need to and can, we bring concessional capital. One great example I know that Daniel and I talk about all the time, because I just think it's too important to not let these kind of projects fail, because it's a tough environment right now, by the way, right? We all know that not only is this hard to do in the first place, but with inflation, with currency going all over the place, with supply chains, it's even more challenging than usual. But the project we are working together in Jeremiah and Chad is absolutely critical. So when you get a project like this, 34 megawatts, 4 megawatts battery storage, we really want to make sure we get down there. So not only the top level of saying, let's get you an advisor, but let's make sure when we get down to the transactions that we're also down there at 10 feet. So 10,000 feet, 10 feet, we work it together, we bring the right partners together to make sure that these kind of things go forward in a much faster way. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Mark, and really thank you for all the support that you're providing to Desert to Power. I think there are a couple of follow-up points that we want to bring in other people in the panel. One is, I think you've referred to the global challenges and trends in the renewable sector, in the solar sector, and I guess sort of what the implications of these global challenges are for the Sahel. So I would really like to bring in Gauri Singh from the International Renewable Energy Agency, just to provide a little bit that global perspective and what that means in terms of challenges and maybe also opportunities for the Sahel. Gauri.
Thanks, Daniel. I think just starting with the huge political momentum that has been built around the climate change and a lot of strategies now being very visible in not just the developed world, but many developing countries have got their strategies together. So what we are really seeing is that if we are to move on the 1.5-degree pathway, then there's going to be a very large investment that we need to upfront bring for this decade, which is nearly to the tune of $5.7 trillion US, because this is the decade on which the foundation for 2050 net zero is going to be built. If you're looking at Africa and Sahel in particular, I think we all know the stats, but just to give a perspective on what kind of flows really came to Africa between 2010 and 2020, it was around $3 trillion US, of which only 2% came into Africa, and that too only in a few limited countries, which means there's this huge gap. And when we talk about the Sahel having the best resources and also the real issues of access, then these are the very obvious challenges that need to be met. I just want to add here that just a couple of days back at IRENA, we facilitated closing of a $1 billion fund, which is to primarily focus on developing countries. And in the last decade, where IRENA was focusing a lot on bringing the analytics to the governments, what we've been hearing from governments is that there is a need for IRENA to also step up pace to bring or to facilitate projects on the ground. And that's where we started working in the last couple of years to build this kind of a facility, which we think is very important, and it provides a very good complementarity to the Desert to Power, on which we are as IRENA also on the steering group. And the way it does that is that this is bringing in not just debt financing partners, but it's also bringing in equity partners and also risk partners who can take on the risk. Because we really think that you can't go in with a linear approach with the Sahel countries. And I hope that the power of aggregation that Desert to Power has will allow us to really accelerate our efforts in partnership with it.
Thank you very much, Gauri. And indeed, I was actually present when the ETAF was launched earlier this week. I think it's a tremendous amount of resources, and I hope that we can collectively channel some of these resources to support the Sahel countries in the context of Desert to Power. I think you've been talking about the financing needed, the financing flows. That also links again to the risk question, risk mitigation. I would really like to bring in Henry and then also Carla on sort of, how can institutions such as the Green Climate Fund, who is already a big supporter on Desert to Power, and I'm pleased to say, Henry, I don't know if you've seen it, that just as of today, the Desert to Power Sahel Channel financing facility is also fully effective. So we're able now to disperse funds, and that's excellent news. So maybe you can just give a little bit your perspective, the role of climate finance, the Green Climate Fund, what are possibilities maybe replicating that also for the other Desert to Power countries in the future. Thank you very much. Henry, please.
Thank you very much, Daniel. The Green Climate Fund is very pleased to be part of this baobab tree hugging, and I think it's all about that partnership. We came to support the Desert to Power with several instruments, and this is something that I think was helpful for the facility, because they needed grants in certain areas where grants as smart subsidies were needed. They also needed guarantees and those guarantees could hopefully allow commercial investors to come on board and protect them from the downside and align them with the impact. And we also provided loans to be part of that facility. So all in all, it was $150 million, but using several instruments. And I think the Green Climate Fund, as we believe that access to energy and renewable energy is core to development, and the SDG 7 is one of those SDGs that we might be able to achieve in 2030, we want to partner by providing that risk capital that the private sector requires. And I think it was very well said, it's not fully de-risking, because at the end, people ought to take risks, but it is rightly aligning or rightly pricing or rightly co-sharing those risks. And GCF, we are a risk taker, long-term patient capital provider. And this is, we've got, about 11 billion that we have already deployed in 209 projects in 140 countries. We can give any instrument in the toolkit, from grant to senior debt, subordinated debt, venture capital, private equity, green bonds. So here we do have that advantage. Now, our resources are limited. So what we would like to do is make sure that we use it smartly in order to align and crowding others. We want to make sure that we're not just providing an arbitrage. We want to make sure that we are providing that catalyzer. And I think with Desert to Power, this is something that we've been able to prove. We also believe, as the Minister of Norway says, that as we go forward, there might be adaptation benefits in some of these efforts in order for us to also work in areas like agriculture, ag tech, where indeed we would also need capital to be able to create a viable opportunity. So we're very excited. We're very excited to see it effective. We signed it, we approved it about less than a year ago, and it's good to see it now effective, and looking forward to working with you, Daniel, and the team to see it implemented and to see it in action. Because a lot of what I hear here is that people want action and want things to get done. So looking forward to more of this partnership, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Henry. And indeed, this is the COP of implementation, and I think that really has to be the focus. I would really like to bring in Carla, because the European Commission is such an important partner for the Sahel countries. We have a close partnership with the European Commission on many fronts, but particularly energy. And would really like to get to the viewer perspective. How can also the European Commission deploy sort of its instruments to help facilitate these investments in the Sahel? Carla, you have the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. And as you right said, the European Commission is really one of the most important partner supporter of the Sahel countries. And energy, as the President said, it's the key enabler for economic development, for social development, for everything. This is the reason why energy is key priority for our partnership with the Sahel countries. We fully share the objective, and we are contributing to achieve the objective of Desert to Power. We are working with our Sahel countries in increasing access to energy, in increasing the renewable energy capacity, in supporting the reform in the different countries, in supporting also the market integration that is also key for the development of the private sector. This year at the summit, at the European Union African Summit, we have launched the Global Gateway Investment Package. We have launched the IJ, the African European Green Energy Initiative. We have from now set aside 3.4 billion euro for the African continent that we want to spend, to commit in the next 4 years. And this is a contribution also to facilitate, to incite the development of the private sector. Let me just give an example, because I think the Minister already said what we need to facilitate the work of the private sector is the development of strategy, the regulatory framework. And we have worked in Niger, to support Mauritania in preparing this global strategy, in reforming the electricity sector, that is capital, in supporting also the creation of capacity building. We mentioned that we support the private sector for the rural electrification with on-grid and off-grid intervention. This we have done in, I will say, many of the Sahel countries. We said that for incitate the work of the private sector, we need interconnection. And I said we have really worked also with the AfD and with other many financial institutions to finance electricity interconnection in 4 countries on the Sahel countries. And we have also supported the construction of solar plants that were already mentioned, could be in Burkina with Zakuli solar plant, in Niamey, in Agadez, and of course in Chad. So many crucial interventions that will facilitate the work of the private sector. But we mentioned also the need to de-risk. So we have just implemented, supported, prepared some new financial instruments that we create some guarantees. We facilitated some blended finance just to facilitate the risking process that will attract the private sector in the difficulties countries that we have in the Sahel. So a differentiation of different tools moving from capacity building, technical assistance, grants for facilitate blended finance and also guarantees, as we will be just launched in Niger with an AGRE program just to facilitate the investment of the private sector. But of course, we need really to do a lot more to facilitate, to incite the private sector to intervene in the Sahel countries. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Carla, for this clear intervention on the point. Also highlighting, of course, that there's a lot of work needed up front. Policy, legal, regulatory framework, very important. A lot has been done by the countries already, but additional support is required. And it's clearly also an area of public-private partnership. And this is where I want to bring in Ali Serwali from Mazen, because Mazen, I think, is an excellent example of this public-private cooperation. So maybe you can sort of bring a little bit that perspective and how, what are sort of the lessons learned from Morocco, from the Mazen experience that could also help deploying investments in the Sahel. Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. So it's not a gift being the last with such speakers. So I don't have many things to add. So maybe being the last, what I can share with you is what are the key success factors that we have experienced in Morocco that we see and we find again in Desert to Power. And this is why Morocco and Mazen are very involved in the success and the achievement of Desert to Power. So we believe in order to draw the path to the private sector and to mobilize the private sector to invest, there is maybe 5 pillars that we worked on and that made the success of the Moroccan strategy regarding the development of the renewable energy. So first, we have a leadership. So the leadership of the king who drew a vision from 2010. And we find again that in Desert to Power, with the leadership of Dr. Adesina and the leadership of the G5 Sahel's chief of states that are taking in charge this initiative and pushing it forward. Then what we understood as another key success factor is that we needed a vision. And we have it also in Desert to Power with 10 gigawatts, with the access rate of electricity that is targeted, etc. What also the private sector needs, it's a clear vision, and it's something that is lacking in most of the strategy, I mean, and it's not really updated in many of the African countries, including Morocco, and this is what we find again in Desert to Power. And what is quite innovative and disruptive is that Desert to Power is not focusing only on the project development, but you understood very well that in order to facilitate this project development, we need to set up this global strategy, and you made the national roadmaps, which are very important because it gives a vision and a clear, transparent strategy to all the investors. But you didn't stop there, and you also set up the regional roadmap, because in order to tackle the intermittency of renewable energy, we need to see what could be the integration of the market at the regional level. You mentioned the interconnections and how we can mitigate all intermittency through that. Maybe the two last key success factors that we find again in Desert to Power is a clear legal framework and clear financial tools that are helping to mitigate the offtake risk, the technical risk, and so on. And this is what Desert to Power through AfDB is also mobilizing. Last but not least, and I'm pretty proud of being part of this commitment, is that we understood in Desert to Power that we need to invest in people. And within just 1 year, Desert to Power have been able to mobilize Mazen, Race for Africa, Arena, Power Africa, and many others to reinforce the capacities of around 300 representatives of government and utilities in the 5 Sahel countries. What would have been if you extend that to the 11? So this is a main pillar on which Desert to Power is investing. And just to end, what is I think what will make the success of Desert to Power as a disruptive and innovative initiative is the capacity that has been shown to mobilize all these several kind of initiatives and institutions into one vision, into one goal. It's not easy to convince all of that different institutions. With all, we have different strategies and priorities into one convergence strategy, aim, targets, and vision. And thank you for what you're doing, and congratulations for that.
Thank you very much, Ali, and I think you very clearly highlighted some of the key success factors. I really want to conclude this panel session by bringing in the Minister of Mauritania. Minister, you have heard everything from all the partners, from your counterpart in Niger as well, and you have invited us on the 8th of December to come to Mauritania for the ministerial meeting. So, taking everything into account, what will be sort of the key points that you want to discuss in December, sort of to really move forward towards implementation? Maybe you could sort of give a little bit your perspective, also to look forward. Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and also thanks to all the speakers. You're very, very interesting, and you know, in Mauritania we have added 11 points in terms of access to electricity over the last 3 years, and this is because maybe we are one of the rare African countries that have not been hit hard by the COVID-19, because we are lucky, to tell you the truth. Our main import are the fuel, and the prices of fuel collapsed. Our main export are iron ore, and the prices went to the roof. But that will certainly not be replicated in the future. But this gave the government the possibility to accelerate the access of electricity. However, even counting for that 11 points, we will not get to our objective of 100% at this rate, because population growth will increase, and we'll need to do maybe far more than that. We need to triple at least 3 times the capacity, existing capacity. And that is accounting for a low consumption, as one of the speakers said. So we should, again, maybe remind ourselves that SDG 7 is about access to electricity, about energy mix, but is also about affordability to electricity. And if we don't get affordability to electricity, maybe we will get the light, but we will not get the transformation. And that is absolutely critical. So we need to recognize either we need to bring down the cost, or the states may need to subsidize electricity for quite some time looking ahead. And that, I think, was mentioned by the one colleague. If you look at the challenge, how can Mauritania or other African countries double or triple their current production? No way you can do it without the private sector. Heavy involvement of the private sector. Public sector will not be able to do it. It will be extremely costly. It will get the debt to the roof, and it will be at the expense of other maybe more important or as important investments. So definitely we need, and this is why indeed we at Mauritania are completely changed our rules and regulation, the law, thanks to the support of the European Union. And I want really to thank you, Carla. This is the fastest technical assistance I have ever seen after 30 years, 35 years working in development. It was incredible, and now the law will pass. I will be to the parliament in the next week. Hopefully it will be to be adopted. It's very modern code. It opens the possibility for private investment added to our PPP laws. It really opens the possibility for large scale. However, we need to go fast, and we need to de-risk. I don't know, head of the Green Climate Fund is putting it another way or pricing rightly, but we need that. We need that. We need to bring down the cost so that we can get to our citizens electricity at a lower price. This is absolutely critical. The second thing, we need speed. Daniel, we need speed because, you know, citizens are waiting, and 2030 is tomorrow. And the planet also cannot wait. Nobody can wait, neither citizen nor the planet. We need to go fast. How can we go fast? And this is a question I am asking ourselves, of course. What can we do as government? We are the main responsible. What can you do, our financial and development partners? What the private sector can do? Is there something innovative that we can do to conclude a public-private partnership investment in 1 year? If we can't do that, then we have got problem. If we need 3 years to add 50 mega, we will not be there in Mauritania, and I think other African countries will not be there. We need really to see how we can go fast, how we can accelerate. It should be possible, but how can we do it? Let's sit together, analyze the situation, and see how we can do. So, de-risking, speed, regulation, and fourth point is really the skills and competencies. We have serious gaps, at least talking for Mauritania, but I believe for other countries as well. And here we need also a different model in terms of capacity building. We have been asking our technical assistance team in European Union, can you find a way where we can send people to an advanced electricity company in Europe and have some maybe of the retirees of that coming? It's this kind of training that we need, not no more of the classic way of doing things. Otherwise also, because we need to accelerate the transfer of technology as well, so that we can reassure the private sector, have professionals in front of them, and have all of this moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think this was a fantastic conclusion to this panel, because you really put a reality check on everything that we said. It's about affordability, it's about speed, and it's about capacity building and de-risking. I think you really summarized it excellent. So I really would like to thank this excellent panel for all their interventions, and looking forward to deepening that partnership going forward. And I would like to invite now the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth, Dr. Kevin Kariuki, to close this fantastic Desert to Power event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Honorable ministers, distinguished panelists, most of whom are my friends, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to make these closing remarks to this exciting session on Desert to Power initiative. Firstly, allow me to express my greatest gratitude to the excellent speakers that have contributed to the depth of dialogue in today's discussions on the opportunities that solar energy offers in transforming the Sahel region from a region of fragility into one of resilience and prosperity. Your energy, commitment, and contributions during this session have been truly inspiring. Thank you very much. We are particularly very grateful for the financial pledges and commitments made by Norway and the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet towards the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. This is a strong vote of confidence in the work of SEFA and will enhance the bank's ability to support critical programs and initiatives such as Desert to Power. We have all heard from the ministers and the representatives of the Sahel countries describe the challenges they face, but they have also highlighted the tremendous opportunities that abound in the region. The narrative that Sahel countries possess so much potential, yet remains amongst the most vulnerable nations on planet, is one that we must change. After all, as my president, Dr. Adesina, often remarks, we cannot eat potential, and neither does potential grow economies. We must therefore join hands and act now, as today's discussions have highlighted the urgency of the required interventions. This is why Desert to Power is so timely, because access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy is critical for addressing the fragility challenges faced by the region today. We must build resilient infrastructure to unlock value. We need to create jobs. We must improve livelihoods through provision of essential services. These all hinge on access to energy. Hence our call to action today, which is we must join forces under the Desert to Power umbrella to harness the solar potential of the Sahel region's socio-economic development. Therefore, the Sahel countries and partners must jointly strive to do three things. Firstly, we must mobilize resources at scale, and as the minister said, at speed. This includes critical concessional resources necessary to accelerate the implementation of Desert to Power projects. Secondly, we must institute and implement the reforms necessary to strengthen the policy and regulatory framework required for the development of solar projects and facilitating greater regional integration. Thirdly, we must establish a collaborative platform that crowds in private sector investments. This call to action incorporates the voices and aspirations of the people of Sahel you've heard from the ministers. It also includes ideas of key speakers and partners, private sector players, etc. Stakeholders who all support the harnessing of the largely untapped and vast solar potential of the Sahel region for the region's socio-economic development through the Desert to Power initiative. To conclude, we seek to expand our partnerships with other technical and financial partners. Accordingly, we therefore call on all other partners to join us in our ambitious goal of generating 10 gigawatts of solar capacity that will provide clean electricity to some 250 million people, while avoiding millions of tons of carbon dioxide emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have the luxury of time on our side. The time to light up and power the Sahel region is actually now. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Thank you very much to the audience for being with us the whole time. Thank you very much to this excellent panel. It's been a real pleasure working with you and continue to work with you. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the stay here at COP27. And this closes formally this panel session and today's event. We will just show, for those that are still interested, a video that we were not able to show earlier, but the official part of the event is over. Thank you very much.
waiting for you in Mauritania. My friend, please. Now, as we have a more representative, we have
Good afternoon, everyone. For those who'd like to join us, may I ask you to take your seats, please? We're about to start. But good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining us. And on behalf of the partners with whom we are hosting this panel, myself from the African Climate Foundation, on behalf of the colleagues from Bloomberg, IRENA, and the colleagues from UNECA, who are also co-hosting this with us, we'd like to welcome you. As you would have seen, the session today is on catalytic collaborations between philanthropies and other actors on the continent in order to identify opportunities to support transitions, just transitions in particular, within the African context. And we're very happy and honored to have multiple speakers among us today with some exciting news, which we will share with you shortly. But perhaps just before I start, I'll hand it over to Irene later to give us a proper overview of the context in which we are operating. But just to get us going, I wanted to perhaps throw in a number just to contextualize philanthropy's engagement for many of us in the continent. Since 2015, climate philanthropy funding in Africa has been increasing at an average of 30% per annum. And that has been a steady increase. And last year alone, we've reached 130 million in investments of philanthropies within the African continent, specifically focusing on climate-related issues. But this remains a small drop in the ocean in terms of the overall global philanthropic engagement worldwide, but also in terms of the need of the African continent. And so we wanted to really use this session to first understand how is philanthropic investment flowing into the African continent. Secondly, understand and have a dialogue really, and that's why we have also institutions that are very close to the field who work on many of these issues, but also many partners in the room today and beyond, to understand what are the opportunities where philanthropic funding can land and have an impact to support the just transition within the African continent. But perhaps before we start, or perhaps rather to hand it over to our first speaker, as I mentioned, to help us understand where are the major investments in philanthropy at the moment. And our speaker, the first speaker, is Irene from the Children's Investment, the Children's Investment Foundation, SIF with double F. And Irene Karani is the Africa Director for Climate at the Children's Investment at SIF. And she has over 28 years of experience in natural resources management, climate change-related issues, and rural livelihoods with communities in Africa. She is based in Nairobi. And I'll hand it over to you, Irene, also to share an exciting announcement with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatan. As Fatan has said, the inflows of financing to Africa are a drop in the ocean. But what does that drop actually mean? You know, is it from global climate finance in total, or is it, what exactly is it? And actually, the situation is really concerning. Just to give you a few numbers. So total global philanthropic support is $12 billion. The Africa drop is 140 million. And look at the size of the continent and the impacts of climate shocks on the continent. And Africa keeps being told we have to leapfrog. These are words that are being used. How do you leapfrog with a drop of the investment? Okay? And being a little bit granular, who is going to assist with the leapfrogging in the energy transition? You need an enabling environment, you need core capacities to be built, you need public engagement. But let us look at the numbers that are coming to Africa on those three things. On an enabling environment, in a study conducted last year, Africa got $1.4 million. The United States got 55 million for energy transition. On capacity building, Africa got $700,000. The United States got 22 million. I think by now you're starting to see what a drop means. It is completely insignificant. For public engagement, Africa got $300,000. The United States got $135 million. So how is Africa going to leapfrog into a just energy transition when it is not the one that has, I mean, this statement, I know, it's beginning to sound cliche, Africa did not cause the problem, but we need to keep repeating it. Africa did not cause the problem. Africa needs investment, not only from development funders, but also from philanthropy. And the philanthropic engagement is quite low also, but the trend has been increasing. As SEFA and working with the Africa Climate Foundation, we have been convening an Africa Funders Forum that is seeking to increase philanthropic funding to Africa, not only for energy, but for adaptation, financing, and so on and so forth. And philanthropic capital cannot replace what governments are meant to be doing. It cannot replace what multilaterals and bilaterals are meant to be doing. Philanthropic capital is meant to ignite and catalyze and crowd in funding. And so today, a group of philanthropists has come together, and we are announcing that philanthropy is going to spend over $500 million in the next 3 years for energy transition in the global south. And because somebody has to take the risk and somebody has to put their foot in. And philanthropic funding is easy to mobilize, and it gets your foot in through the door and and starts crowding in the development financing and everything else. So we are committed to this. We are a group of 9 philanthropists, and over the next 3 years, we'll be spending over $500 million in the global south for energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you very much. Thank you also for providing us for that sobering context in which we're operating as philanthropies within the African continent. I wanted to turn to you, Priya. Priya, you're representing Bloomberg Philanthropies with us today. And as Bloomberg, you've announced recently that you will be scaling up your own investments to 15 additional African countries. And so my question to you is why? Why scaling up the investment within Africa? And the second question, which I think Irene also touched on, is the role of philanthropy needs to be catalytic. And maybe just for the audience to help understand where you see that role particularly being played. For those who do not know Priya, Priya is the India, as I said, she's with the Bloomberg Philanthropies as India Director for climate. I'll hand it over to you, Priya. Thank you.
Thank you, Faten. And first of all, I would just like to say that at Bloomberg Philanthropies, we're pleased to be joining this group of philanthropies along with the Sequoia Climate Fund and others that Irene just talked about on this initiative today, bringing together a number of different philanthropies to support clean energy transition work in Africa. I will add a couple more stats to the ones that Irene already shared with us. I think the first is that we actually worked with BNEF, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, to look into the state of renewable energy investment and transition in Africa, launched a report earlier this week focusing on Africa. And that found that of overall investment into renewable energy globally, only 0.6% is coming into Africa. And this was really shocking. I mean, I think we expected it to be low, but we were surprised by how low it was, especially given the potential that Africa has with 60% of the world's solar resources, yet only around 1.5% of existing solar capacity. And I think that gets to the question as well that you were asking, Faten, about why we're investing in Africa, why we're expanding our work here, is because we think there's so much unmet and untapped potential and so much need to really expand this work and help realize this potential, and that philanthropy can play a unique role here. Another stat that I'm going to add as well is that of all the foundation funding flowing in internationally for climate mitigation funding, only about 4% of that comes to Africa currently. So that is also something that, as we step up efforts at Bloomberg Philanthropies, the efforts that are happening with SIF and Sequoia and other climate foundations that we are working with, we really hope to see that increasing. Coming back to your question about the sort of role that you think philanthropic funding can play, the sort of catalytic role, I'd like to echo and agree with Irene that it is not a replacement for public funding. It is not a replacement for government spending or multilateral and bilateral and development funding. Those are still very much required and necessary. It's also not a replacement for private capital investment. That is also required and necessary. At Bloomberg Philanthropies, we're actually expanding our work into 25 countries globally, but of those we have chosen 15 in Africa, developing countries overall. And we see sort of two kind of strategic pathways that we're really focusing on in terms of our philanthropic funding efforts. The first is around technical capacity building, technical assistance on policy, policy design, and also building capacity locally in terms of engaging with civil society and engaging with local communities and supporting that sort of local capacity and engagement on these issues. And we're working with both sort of international organizations such as the Sustainable Energy for All and the International Solar Alliance, but then also trying to engage with local within-country groups to sort of help build capacity, and are of course also pleased to be working with the African Climate Foundation on this agenda. The second role that we see is we're working very closely with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which is a group of over 500 financial institutions committed to achieving net zero by 2050 or earlier. And this group known as GFANS has also launched an Africa network recently, which is focused on sort of bringing together African financial institutions with international financial institutions to work together on both how to mobilize capital into Africa, as well as to accelerate the sort of transition and climate planning and thinking amongst African financial institutions. And here we see that kind of philanthropy can play a role both in terms of helping on project preparation, and also in terms of kind of convening and playing a sort of bridge building role, bringing together the different actors, the different stakeholders that are required for this transition together. So we will need action from philanthropy, but also from government, also from the private sector, also from civil society and communities. And philanthropy can help kind of convene and connect all these different players together in a wider ecosystem of action that is required.
Thank you very much, Priya, I think it was very clear as to where philanthropy comes in versus other forms of finance. And it's interesting also to hear what Bloomberg has been doing. You know, we're speaking of philanthropy coming in to support and boost a bit the discussion on just transition within the African continent. And I'd like to say that it's, you know, it's not a theory. It's already happening. It's happening in practice in African countries. And the hope is to build on these experiences, but perhaps to just shed some light on what is already happening in terms of philanthropic support and in what form is that support being provided. I wanted to bring in two of my colleagues, Salim Fakir, who is the executive director of the African Climate Foundation, as well as Zira, who is in Nigeria at the moment. But before I get to you, Zira, Salim, you've been very closely involved in this process also of the engagement of philanthropies, particularly in the South African case. And so I wanted to ask you if you could share with us some of the key highlights on how you've worked with philanthropies to unlock the funding in South Africa.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to have you all here, particularly Irene and people from Bloomberg and so on. Just to say, we have started a new foundation, the African Climate Foundation, about 2.5 years ago. I don't come from philanthropy usually. Well, I haven't actually. I don't think in my life I've actually received any philanthropy funding for all the work I've done in this arena. But I think it was a interesting process. I mean, we had the early investment from SEFA, and our focus was very much on South Africa in the early phase, and really about trying to build a strategy of increasing investments in the energy transition. And I think that the experience we have in being able to mobilize philanthropy funding is been largely to witness we can move quite fast, we're flexible. We can respond to situations very, very easily. It's very hard to do that if you receive funding from a bilateral funder. Most of you would know that if you had German funding or French funding and so on. They have different mandates, different governance, and one has to obviously respect that. With philanthropy, I think a lot of it is about taking some really calculated risk, trusting the people on the ground to make the judgment calls on, often it's political and technical, and also building networks, the right ecosystem to be able to facilitate this. And I think the significance of that, both the combination of flexibility, really understanding the local context, more importantly, the politics of the local context. Most people think that climate is just a technical solution, and you solve it by providing technical answers. I have this word of PowerPoint emissaries. You know, they go around, they do PowerPoints, and that offers the answer. And actually, you have to do a lot of groundwork in building not only legitimacy for the foundations, because most African governments want you to work in a particular way with them. You have to also give them the space to lead. I think more importantly, foundations like philanthropies cannot impose themselves. They have to actually be really more in the role of supporting. And the investments we made, which is very small actually compared to what we can leverage. For example, the 2-year investment we've made in South Africa has led to an 8.5 billion deal. We are obviously now focusing on a lot more on the elements of the investment plan and the delivery of the investment plan. And we are replicating similar models in Namibia with hydrogen, doing that in Senegal and Nigeria, and I'm sure Azera will talk about that. So I think I'll just say that occupies a very important space in that early phase development. It can't cover all the, as you said, all the financial needs. There's always, when the investment reaches the scale it has, for example, on the JETP, you have to be able to mobilize other sources of funding to be able to get it to the right level.
Thank you, Salim. I often like saying, I think that to some degree the role of philanthropy is that of almost an early investor in a kind of a proof of concept almost that then can be scaled. And as Salim said, I mean, as an African Climate Foundation, we started the engagement in South Africa in particular, but we increasingly see an appetite also elsewhere on the continent, based on country specificities, because, you know, with an engagement of foundations in South Africa does not necessarily look the same as an engagement foundation in Nigeria, which has different realities. And so I wanted to bring you in here, Zira. Zira, for those who don't know him, Zira Kwage, he is at the Energy Transition Office in Nigeria. And like Salim, you do have an experience perhaps in philanthropies as well, Zira. So if you can perhaps wear both hats, but if you could, particularly my question to you is, where has philanthropy come in the case of Nigeria, and where do you see the major gap?
Thank you very much, Fatan, and apologies for joining late. I was running late from another engagement. So to discuss the role of philanthropy in just energy transitions in Africa, I think I will build on what the previous speakers have already discussed, which is the fact that philanthropy is meant to play a catalytic role, but in no way a replacement for private funding and public sector funding as well. So I'm going to speak briefly about the role of the experience of Nigeria and some of my experiences working in philanthropy across the region as well. I like to think, okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Okay, so I like to think about it as a three-step chain. The first part of that chain is really about establishing clear climate action commitments at the highest level of government. The second part of the chain is really about implementation and turning the plans into action. And then the third part of the chain is about the accountability and the accountability mechanisms needed to keep the plan in check. So the role of philanthropy, you know, cuts across these three areas. And in terms of setting commitments and you know, establishing plans for climate action, we've seen an increase in Africa over the past few years. In 2020, for example, there were only less than 10 African countries that had net zero plans or incorporated climate action into their national development plans. Now, as we speak in 2020, there are about, you know, according to ECIU, about 23 countries in Africa with net zero plans. So that shows progress that philanthropy has made in getting countries to raise their ambition by sharing lessons across countries, either within Africa or with other regions that have gone ahead. Then to the second part of the chain, which is about implementation. I think philanthropy can play an important role in developing the evidence base. So using data, models, pathways to actually inform how these plans are being implemented. Because a plan is really just a plan. It has to be broken down into sectors. It has to be broken down into actions, and then having different, you know, parts of government working towards the plan. And I think philanthropy can play an important role here. In Nigeria, for example, we've seen the role that philanthropy played in setting up the Energy Transition Office, which is designed to implement the energy transition plan that was launched last year in Glasgow. So I think this is for me, I think, a critical part where philanthropy can really step up. Because I was at an event on Tuesday this week, a CATF event, where they mentioned that about 2/3 of climate research on African countries was actually produced outside Africa with no inclusion of African-based researchers, 2/3. So that shows that there's a major gap in understanding the local context. And there's also, I think it's also an evidence of a capacity gap where I think philanthropy can increase investments. Then moving on to the final part of the chain, which is around the accountability mechanisms to keep the plan in check. I think philanthropy has played an important role over it's an area that philanthropy is quite familiar with, which is advocacy, campaigns, movements. But I think we need to start thinking beyond classic campaigns and movements and thinking about ways to institutionalize climate action in government processes, in national development plans, and whatnot. So in summary, I'll just say different countries are at different stages of this chain that I described, and a chain is really as strong as its weakest link. So philanthropy needs to really understand where they think the chain is weakest in country-specific manners, and then try to invest to build up to make the chain stronger. So I'll stop here, Fatin.
Thanks a lot, Zira, and thanks again for the reminder on the country context and the fact that interventions are not at one point. They are across a value chain, as you put it, and that we need to be very cognizant of that. So we just heard a couple of experiences concretely in terms of how philanthropy has engaged. And I wanted to turn to a couple of institutions who have a strong hold, I think, in terms of engagement in the African continent. You've been working, both Irina and the UN Economic Commission for Africa, very, very closely. You know the terrain quite well. But maybe I wanted to turn first to you, Dr. Hanan Morsi, to ask, well, UNECA has been very much engaged, including in advising African countries in how to design different aspects of the transition, including along this value chain question that Zira referred to. And I was wondering, what are the gaps that you see in terms of needs where philanthropy could potentially come on board? And the second question is, we often, as Irene and Priya mentioned earlier, we are in a situation of low philanthropic investment in the African continent. And not just philanthropic, but also in terms of investments in renewable energy. And the argument that we often hear is, there are no pipelines, there are no, so my question to you is, would you say that this lack of investment is a demand or supply question? And sorry, for those who don't recognize her, she's Dr. Hanan Morsi, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fatin. Okay, so maybe let's go a couple of steps back to really just kind of have an overview of the issue of the needs. Because we've been talking about the needs, but we need to quantify what we're talking about. So Africa needs $3 trillion in financing mitigation and adaptation by 2030, okay? And as you very well know, we're not anywhere near to the financing that is required. Second, in terms of the flows that we receive less than 3% of private sector financial flows for climate issues. So that says that, while the needs are humongous, what we receive is minimal. And also the role of the private sector in addressing the climate issues in Africa is 14%, while in other regions like Asia, Latin America, it's about 50%. US is 96% of the total, financing that happens. So there are, many things that are needed. We need to actually scale up and speed the financing needs in general for the continent, but we need to also crowd in the private sector to have a greater role. What are the kind of like, the things, the impediments that are affecting this? There are a number of issues there. Part of it is actually risk premium. The fact that both Africa, actually sovereign as well as by default the private sector, faces a high premium. African countries pay around 250 basis points higher than other countries with the same fundamentals. So, and on the private sector, actually, even like, for project finance, while Africa has lower default rate, about 5.5%, other regions that have double that rate, have, better risk perception than the continent. So part of the issue is how do you tackle that? And then, we move into the issue of what is the role of the philanthropy in this. I'd like to start by saying that actually philanthropy has already, played a role already in that sphere, because they have led the way in some areas as a demonstration case. And here I'd like to, for example, mention, for debt for nature swaps. It was thanks to philanthropy funding that this actually advanced in a number of countries. So they were the leaders that has helped this, kind of pick up and then become, able to attract others and crowd in others. So they were critical. Now we are at a stage where I was talking in other panels that, yes, thanks to philanthropy, we actually showed that this can happen. For us to move from, the millions to billions, others need to follow suit, know that this model works and how they can help. So one, I think there is a critical role for philanthropy in the issue of demonstrating, leading and demonstrating with success stories what can be done, so that you can put pressures on those that think it cannot be done, and then they can come into the stage where they're providing, guarantees so that this can scale up, whether it's MDBs or, G7 countries and so on. Second is the issue of advocacy in terms of advancing important agendas that really need a lot of pushing. I think this is an area also that philanthropy has been quite active and quite useful. So that will need to, it's critical and need to continue. Then, of course, as we were talking about the issue of the risk perception, there's the awareness. There's the role of perhaps having this as an evidence-based studies and awareness raising campaigns on how is it that the reality versus the actual risk on the ground do not match, and showing that and communicating that in an evidence-based way. Then the other things where the philanthropy, I think, can help, and there is a huge room, for many players, including them, are issues of the preparation, as you mentioned before. So ECA, we held a regional forum in preparation for COP to look at projects that are that we can put forward. There were 200 projects that were proposed to kind of to be reviewed and to link up with investors. And this was very useful because not only it showed which ones, a subset, a small subset, got interest, but it was very important to get the feedback for those that are proposing these projects on what exactly they need to do to attract investors, to be more bankable, and to move forward. So I think part of perhaps what the philanthropy can help with is the preparation stage of these projects, capacity building, and how to ensure that they are more successful in terms of being bankable, in terms of connecting with investors and what the investors are looking for in the design of the project. And then another area that they can, perhaps consider are issues of, what is holding back currently the private sector are the issues that they need, more de-risking, whether it's equity investment, whether it's guarantees, credit enhancement, instruments. So perhaps it's an area where, philanthropy can think, how they can play a bigger role to start crowding in the private sector and bring to scale. So these, I think, are really some of the key things that I see really a huge scope for engagement from philanthropies in, but we have to acknowledge that they have been already critical in some of these issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much also for that reminder, but I think a number of pointers here in terms of where philanthropy can come in, and I might come back to you, Priya and Irene, later on for some reflections. But let me bring you in, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth comes to us from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. You're Director of Planning and Program Support in the Executive Office. And IRENA has been very active, particularly in engaging on the rollout and a scale-up of renewables across the African continent. You've worked on issues such as, the whole project preparation, but you're also doing much more on data. I often say the reports from IRENA to me are the go-to reports in terms of understanding the context of renewables in Africa and the challenges related to that. So, Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you, what are, based on your experiences in these areas, what are the gaps that you see and the challenges, particularly for the African countries, and where philanthropy can support?
Thank you, Fadan, and thank you, everybody. Very nice to see you, a lot of friends in this room. I was listening to everybody, and I have a benefit of your input to reflect on what we're discussing today. And every one of us mentioned statistics. And I'm going to add one more, because Priya, you mentioned how surprised you were with the flows, so the percentage of flows going to Africa. In January, we released the African market analysis. And in the last 20 years, globally, almost $3 trillion were invested in renewables globally. Africa got 60 billion. I was so shocked. I thought it was a mistake. There was a zero missing. 60 billion. It's 20 years. It just boggles the mind. And I think there's a lot more of this information that really should be shocking and unacceptable to all of us. But we will do something. All of us want to do something because we understand that there is a gap. And so this is where this really unattractive thing like data collection comes into play. It's just not something that a minister can come and say, this country supported data collection for something. It's just not attractive. And where we see a huge gap is in the off-grid sort of decentralized data resource. It just doesn't exist. It's very anecdotal. The World Bank is doing some work. We're trying to do some work as well, especially to show the business case of renewables, how they create jobs, how they use for productive use, to really have statistics and not just anecdotal newspaper articles, how a woman in the mountain in Kenya has a mobile phone business because she has a solar panel. And it's true, and it makes a difference, but we should understand how that happens, how many of these systems exist, and how we can scale it up and make it bigger and better for everybody. So I think this is something that, because it's invisible and not attractive for otherwise financing, to really trigger, train people, institute systems, and put this foundation in place that the governments can later on build upon and actually integrate in their energy planning. And this is what brings me to the second point. We work with the WHO on the rural electrification. And so there is so many facilities that just simply have no electricity. And part of the problem was that Ministry of Health does not fund or plan for energy, and Ministry of Electricity or Energy, they just don't have this on their radar because it's off grid. It's somewhere in remote area. So it wasn't even that the people didn't want to do it or whatever. It just wasn't featuring in any of the plans. So having some of these linkages and understandings is really going to help to solve some problems. The second part that I want to flag is around project facilitation. You're absolutely right, 100% agree with you that this has to be brought to bankability, but it has to go a step further. This is what we're trying to do. The renewable projects are small. They're like small and medium size, and like private sector investment will just not come. They're not interested in a small run-of-the-mill project in Kasese in Uganda. They're just not interested in it. And so helping project developers and governments in many instances to develop these project information notes, to bring them a little bit more forward and bring them closer to where financial institutions and some innovative financing will actually pay attention and more maybe enable aggregation and a larger scale investment. I think that would be extremely useful. We have some experience with it. It's not easy, but it's also the learning things that come from it that can be fed back and amplified. And then the last point I want to make is around innovation. And Zira mentioned that some of the leapfrogging revolution will happen through entrepreneurship. And this is not technology transfer. This is not something that's going to come from the global north. This has to happen on the ground in circumstances when people are living and inventing things for themselves. On Tuesday, we're going to have the Energy Day, and we're bringing somebody from Ghana to speak about what they're doing with renewables. They don't think about where this energy is coming from. They're looking at technology and what purpose it can serve. There is so much innovation, and putting some philanthropic money in the areas where there are these small incubators, entrepreneurial sort of initiatives to amplify that, to empower people to innovate for themselves, for their circumstances, for their needs, and amplify these networks and connect innovators around the continent to actually share experiences and be linked to each other and to innovate for their circumstances. I think that would be phenomenal contribution together with the entrepreneurial innovations around, energy system, decentralized system, which really are African. They will not come from the global north. So that would be my three things that I think you could really make a big difference.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And also for a reminder that when we speak of support, it's not only to bring the external into Africa, but also to amplify and support the ecosystem that's already in the continent. Before I come back to both Irene and Priya, I just wanted to check in the room if there were any questions or comments. There are few, all right. So I'll allow some time just for questions. I see 3 hands, so we'll take them in one go. Allow the panelists also to reply to them, and I'll throw in my question.
Thank you so much. My name is Marcy from Kenya. I really want to participate in this interesting discussion on philanthropic funding. I want to agree that there are some small gaps that makes it difficult for African countries to even be able to qualify for funding, especially the preparedness level. So if we can be supported in the areas of getting prepared to be able to appreciate or to be able to absorb any other funding that comes, that could be an area that philanthropic can go in. Institutional support, capacity building, and preparedness areas in terms of like preparing action plans and compliance issues that have blocked many African countries from accessing other funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Mtembo Gazi. I am from South Africa. and I'm really glad to be here representing the youth that is in the Global South. I have a question for the gentleman that is from the African Climate Foundation. I find it very interesting that there is this new foundation, more especially in South Africa. I was trying to see if when you were speaking, you were making a note about taking calculated risks to make judgment calls with people on the ground. And I'm just quite interested in the types of networks that you're trying to build in those spaces, be it the stakeholders that are from the local ground, since it's more intimate with the civil society, and just building more on that. And just one more question for Elizabeth. Could you please outline the guidelines that are more crucial in terms of capacity building and implementation action, more especially for projects in local communities? Thank you.
That was it, or did we miss somebody? Razan. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Razan. I'm from Cape Town, and I'm with the Open Society Africa. A few days ago, there was another discussion here around funding with the EU and Africa. And it was interesting that the representative from the EU was saying that there aren't enough big plans or big projects coming from Africa, things worth funding. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, if that really is true. And then to the colleague from Nigeria, you're right, I think there's a lot of, even the recent IPCC report pointed out that so little research comes directly from the continent. And I'm just wondering what can be done to do that, including with Elizabeth, with your institution, which obviously also does research that we all go to. How much investment do you make in local knowledge and local researchers in terms of that data? Because that's important, right? That data is used in terms of the types of projects. And if it's not been done locally, then it means it's again thought of and determined in the north, and the implementation plans then decided that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Let me perhaps throw in my own question, following on also what Hanan said earlier. And I'd like your reflections, both in terms of the distinction between, for instance, impact investments and the role of philanthropy there versus other types of philanthropies, and just perhaps to outline where some come in and where others are not in a position to come in. Maybe let me start with I was going to say from that corner, since today the males are in a minority, so I'll honor you. Maybe to you, Zira, first.
Thanks for empowering us. Yeah, so to the question on, I think the first question was one about absorption capacity. And from working in philanthropy, it's a question that we've always had. What is the absorption capacity for grants or philanthropic funding in Africa? And maybe Irene would be able to shed more light on that. But I think we pay too much attention to that instead of just actually funding and building. I think it's more about a hesitance from the global West than anything else. That's just my personal view. But I would love to hear what Irene thinks about that. Then on the second, there was a question from OSF there on how to actually close the research and data gaps. I think I'll respond to this in two parts. One is on raising the existing voices, and then the second is on building new voices and new capacity. So a lot of research, a lot of data already exists in Africa. The challenge is that it's not in formats or in platforms that are easily usable for meaningful analysis. In some cases, it's published as PDFs and kept in academic institutions or government agencies. So I think the first step for philanthropy is to understand what exists at the moment and how can we make use of what is available as a first step. Then alongside that, which is the second step, is then to build new capacity on innovative modeling techniques, because the world is moving ahead. You know, blockchain is being used now for Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 assessments in Canada, US, and Europe. We need to bring that capacity to Africa. And then, you know, that capacity building needs to cut across sectors and not only focus on energy or where we have, you know, more existing funding going to. So I think I'll stop there.
The next gentleman. Okay. Thank you. I want to respond to your question, but I want to frame it in a way where there's a historical problem of selection bias. And I want to give you an illustration of the problem. So for example, if you look at fintech investments in Africa, and first of all, a lot of the venture capital funds tend to give it to expatriates based in Africa. This is really interesting. Very little of that, and I talked to some of them, particularly Nigerian fintech entrepreneurs. They really struggle to break the selection bias problem. And I think what's different with having a foundation in Africa is that we can break that selection bias by actually creating, through the network-based model and strategy, to find, and because we can take a little bit of risk, we can potentially work with people to unlock innovation and really amazing ideas that are out there, because the continent is so diverse and rich. It's the ability to be able to create that potential for those ideas to flourish and to scale up. So we as a foundation, we try to diversify. We have to work on a big idea. Usually the strategy of trying to work on too many ideas doesn't work. You have to try, or it might just crowd out, because you end up giving too small money to too many different things that never really get to scale. So you have to choose a big transformative idea and build an ecosystem around it. And it's different layers: government, it's business, it's civil society, on the grassroots level. And you have to try to push the idea, have a 5-year vision for it, and you try to push it as hard as you can. That's the way we think about the JET piece. It's a way of crowding. And what philanthropy funds do is that once you can prove an idea and it has momentum, you can attract a lot more other funding into the space. We've seen that in South Africa with the JETP. So I think this idea of breaking the problem of selection bias is what we seek to try to achieve. We have different models. If people can't run an operation, we fiscal host them. We can actually support them because we want the best people to run with the best ideas. They don't want to handle administration. We can try to create structures where they can do that. We don't expect people to try to go through all the verification of actually due diligence, of actually having a structure and not being able to get the funds to support them. You're more likely to get that with bilateral institutions and so on. So the philanthropy space can occupy a unique way to drive innovation. And we have different flexibilities to be able to innovate in how we can operationalize it.
Thank you, Salim. Hanan, I'll let you answer this controversial question perhaps from Razan on, does Africa, the argument we hear from bilaterals, for instance, is that there isn't much to invest in Africa, and also it's a question to you,
Elizabeth. I think the issue relates to what we had mentioned earlier about the bankability of the projects, how it's put together, how it's designed, how it's structured, and then the experience on what is required. So are there projects? Yes, but are they, do we have enough volume of bankable projects? No, that's something definitely we need to work on. That's the whole discussion, and that's why we're having these forums that I've mentioned earlier that we did in ECA ahead of COP to bring that to the table to get feedback for those that are proposing projects on what exactly, what didn't attract the potential investors to consider their own proposal. And we need to do more of that, and we need more of the technical assistance to bring to scale the projects and the capacity in the continent. But I wanted to also say something in general, like for as an you know, in terms of approach for philanthropy. I think it's very important to be catalytic. It's not just about the philanthropy like coming in, but it's also about bringing the other, you know, partners and financiers and so on to what also they are bringing. This matters. So playing a catalytic role will be key. And of course, I totally agree with my colleague here who mentioned the issues of innovation. Absolutely. That's why, like, you know, this is why they need sometimes to kind of lead the way in supporting things that can be transformative. And definitely that's part of like innovative projects, and totally agree with what was said earlier that innovation takes a different you know, form and shape. Like, you know, innovation that is done for US and Canada is not going to work for Africa. So it needs to be homegrown to actually work for the continent. And that's why what we had before was like, you know, mobile banking in Kenya was a solution for what they were going through, but then actually others replicated. So, you know, having these domestic, locally grown solutions and innovations will be really key going forward.
Okay, I will very quickly squeeze a few things. On the large-scale projects, I think oftentimes we talk about energy as an individual projects on a solar plant, this and that and whatever. I think there are plenty of infrastructure projects and large-scale which are absolutely critical for energy in Africa, and I think the problem lies elsewhere, and we can actually have a separate meeting about it. But part of it is also that we are in the midst of transition, and everybody is learning. This is a new system, and everybody is a little bit learning, and I think the people are a little bit more cautious going into an area that they're not accustomed to working as well. So I think there's a lot more to the story. I wouldn't agree that there's no projects, large-scale projects. I think the smaller scale projects, and this is to your question as well, I think they're a lot more difficult because they're absolutely not interesting to private sector investors because they're the small scale. Even though they might be transformative, they're just a lot more difficult. And I think this is where another idea for philanthropies, there is some ideas around the small revolving funds that can be done in communities to actually catalyze, to enable local communities to actually self-sustain, or train local financing institutions to actually lend money to families to do it themselves. And there was one more thing that I wanted to say, but I'm gonna pass this on. So.
Okay. Thank you, Fatan. So you asked a question on impact investments and where philanthropy comes in and does not come in. So philanthropy does play a part in creating the enabling environment for impact investments. And some philanthropies actually have an impact investing arm. And like the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, we did have an impact investing arm. So it is complementary. It's not one or the other, but creating the enabling environment for impact investments is something that philanthropy can do to crowd in the necessary financing.
Thank you. I think just reflecting a bit on what we've heard here and also on some of the lessons of our work on energy transition in other geographies, I think the things that it sort of seems that we need are political leadership and policy, public awareness and engagement and demand, better evidence and data, and finally partnerships. And I think there's something that philanthropy has a role to play across each of these areas, and echoing what some of my fellow panelists have said, can be nimble and flexible and catalytic, and can really help unlock and unleash and crowd in all the other actors that need to be involved in this space. And that's what I really hope can be a kind of agenda for philanthropic engagement in Africa moving forward.
Fantastic closing points, Priya. I think that sums up. I don't need to sum it up. Thank you very much. We have to now close. I'd like to thank each one of you for joining us today. And just to reiterate, certainly on behalf of the African Climate Foundation, and I think I can speak also for some of the other philanthropies, that our commitment to engage in Africa is here. And so we look forward to partnerships with as many actors as possible. Thank you very much for joining us.
Can we clear the room, please? Just like that. Can we clear the room? We want to set up. Hello, we're going to have a closed session. So if you could clear the room, thank you so much.